My son sat there smirking, like he'd already buried me with his mama's fortune, $34 million, and he thought I'd walk out of that office empty-handed. But the second the lawyer opened his mouth, that smug look melted faster than butter on cornbread. His voice cracked, his face turned red, and for the first time in years he looked scared of me, scared of the truth his mama left behind. You ever watch arrogance crumble in real time? It's pure satisfaction. Subscribe for more of my story and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if it was your own child? I was standing by the kitchen window watching the morning light slip through the blinds like a slow confession. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept holding the cup anyway just to feel something warm in my hands. My house creaked the way old houses do when there's no laughter left to fill them. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of the neighbor's dog. Then the phone rang. It was one of those moments when time hesitates. The kind that splits your life in two before and after. The voice on the other end was polite, rehearsed the kind that had delivered the same news to 100 other families. "Pastor Carter," she said softly. "I'm sorry to inform you that Brianna passed early this morning." For a second I thought the line had gone dead because I didn't hear anything, not even my own breathing. Just the sound of my heart, heavy and slow. I didn't say much. I thanked her, hung up, and stood there with the phone still in my hand, staring at the faded wallpaper I'd been meaning to replace for years. Brianna and I hadn't spoken in months. Maybe years if you count silence as a distance greater than miles. She was always moving business meetings, conferences, charity galas. I used to joke that her calendar had more ink than her Bible, but she'd laugh, kiss me on the cheek, and say, "James, faith doesn't pay the bills." Now faith was all that was left. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one we bought at a yard sale when we were still building dreams instead of walls. Her voice came back to me like an old hymn, soft, confident, and too proud to ask for help. She'd built an empire while I built sermons no one wanted to hear anymore. The church attendance had dwindled after the new megachurch opened across town. Folks wanted flashing lights and a pastor with perfect teeth, not an old man quoting the gospel from a cracked Bible. I looked around my house. Everything in it had a history. The chipped cross above the doorway, the old clock that lost 5 minutes every day, the couch that sagged in the middle like it was tired of holding me up. I wasn't poor, but I was one bad month away from it. My son Marcus hadn't called since Easter. Said he was busy handling his mother's affairs. That phrase, cold mechanical, fit him perfectly. He'd inherited his mother's ambition, but none of her softness. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the same sentence in my head. She's gone. I thought about the first time I saw her at a church revival in Savannah. She was standing near the choir wearing a yellow dress that caught the sunlight like honey. She smiled at me as if she already knew I'd fall for her. And I did. Hard. We married a year later, raised Marcus in a 2-bedroom house that smelled like cornbread and Sunday mornings. For years we were inseparable. She'd sit in the front pew every service nodding along as I preached about love and forgiveness. But success changes people. It doesn't happen all at once. It sneaks in slowly, like rot behind fresh paint. Her business took off and she started dressing differently, talking differently. The woman who once prayed before every meal began praying only before signing contracts. By the time she left, our marriage had already died. The papers were just the funeral. After the call, I spent hours pacing, thinking about Marcus. I knew he'd call eventually, not out of love, but obligation. And he did 2 days later. His tone was sharp, impatient. "Dad, the lawyer's reading the will on Friday. You should come just so there aren't any misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. I almost laughed. Marcus always spoke like life was a business meeting. Friday came faster than I expected. I woke before sunrise, pressed my best shirt, polished my shoes until they caught the weak morning light. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. The gray in my beard had spread like frost. My hands, once steady enough to build furniture, now trembled just enough to remind me of the years gone by. I drove to the law office downtown. The building was tall, all glass and steel, reflecting the city like it wanted to swallow it whole. Marcus was already there, sitting across from the lawyer's desk, his suit sharp, his expression sharper. He didn't stand to greet me, just glanced up, gave a small nod, and went back to scrolling on his phone. "Dad," he said flatly. "Didn't think you'd make it." "I always show up," I said, "even when people expect me not to." He didn't respond. The lawyer, a man with a silver tie and careful eyes, adjusted his glasses and began sorting through a stack of papers. The silence in that room was heavy, thicker than any sermon I'd ever given. I could feel Marcus watching me, waiting to see me squirm, waiting for confirmation that I was irrelevant. When the lawyer cleared his throat, Marcus straightened in his chair like a child waiting for dessert. But as the words began to roll off the lawyer's tongue, something shifted. He spoke of Brianna's estate, her properties, her shares, her charitable trusts. My name wasn't mentioned once, not until the end. Marcus's grin widened with each passing line. Then the lawyer paused. His tone changed. He looked directly at me, then back at the papers. "Per the final clause," he said, "Mrs. Brianna Carter leaves controlling ownership of Carter Enterprises and the remaining $33.5 million to her former husband, Pastor James Carter." The room went silent except for the soft buzz of the fluorescent light above us. Marcus froze. His phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. For a heartbeat I thought he might laugh. But then his face turned red, deep, furious red, and he shot up from his chair. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. "That can't be right." The lawyer stayed calm, professional. "It's all verified. Your mother signed these documents 3 weeks before her passing. She was clear-minded and deliberate." Marcus turned to me, his eyes blazing. "You did this? You manipulated her." I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and said quietly, "Son, sometimes people see the truth too late." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. The lawyer handed me the envelope, sealed heavy with finality. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there, letting the moment settle like dust in sunlight. Driving home, I passed the old church. The paint was peeling and the sign out front leaned slightly to the right, but I could still see the words we'd chosen together. "Faith is not what you see. It's what you know." I pulled over and sat in the parking lot, listening to the cicadas hum in the Georgia heat. The inheritance didn't feel like victory. It felt like a reckoning. A woman who once left me behind had still remembered who stood beside her when the world turned cold. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement, I whispered a prayer, not for money, not for revenge, but for peace. Because deep down, I knew this story wasn't over. There was one letter still sealed, waiting to be read, and I had a feeling what was inside would change everything. I first saw Brianna on a summer afternoon that smelled like fried catfish and hot pavement. She was standing in front of Jenkins' Grocery, her hands on her hips, giving the store manager a piece of her mind about charging the elderly more for produce past its prime. Her voice cut through the air like a trumpet on Sunday morning, strong, clear, unshakable. The manager, a man twice her size, kept trying to interrupt, but Brianna didn't flinch. She stood her ground until he gave her what she demanded: fairness. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't love at first sight. It was recognition. The kind you feel deep in your bones when you see someone who was built to challenge the world and still smile doing it. I pretended to browse the canned goods just to keep watching her. She walked past me with a paper bag in her arms, looked up and said, "You a pastor, ain't you?" I must have looked shocked because she laughed, this low, rolling laugh that made me forget the heat for a second. Only a preacher keeps his shirt that starched in July. I told her she was right. She told me I needed to loosen up. We talked right there on the sidewalk for almost an hour about church, about community, about how folks in our neighborhood looked out for each other even when they didn't have much to give. She said, "You can tell who a person is by how they treat the ones who can't give 'em nothing back." I carried that line with me for years. Still do. We married the next spring at the small church where I preached on the west side of Atlanta. The choir sang until the walls shook and the whole neighborhood showed up with casseroles, sweet tea, and stories about how Brianna had helped them one way or another. She had that gift people felt seen around her. She could talk to the mayor or the janitor and make both feel like they mattered. And Lord, she had ambition. Not the selfish kind. The kind that made you believe life could be bigger than your paycheck and your zip code. We didn't have much, but we had each other. She worked as a secretary for a small accounting firm, and I led my little congregation with sermons that mixed scripture with stories about everyday life. We hosted church potlucks that lasted until midnight, with laughter spilling out of the fellowship hall into the parking lot. Sometimes after everyone left, we'd sit under the oak tree out back, the one with roots that broke through the concrete, and dream about the future. She'd say, "James, one day we're going to build something that lasts. Something our children can be proud of." I'd nod, not because I understood what she meant, but because I believed in her enough to follow wherever that fire led. When Marcus was born, the world seemed to tilt in our favor. She held him like he was the promise she'd been waiting for. I remember her whispering into his tiny ear, "You're going to be more than we ever were." I thought it was a blessing then. I didn't know it would turn into a curse later. Brianna threw herself into motherhood with the same energy she gave to everything else. Determined, tireless, impossible to stop. She'd take Marcus to every community event, every fundraiser, every church picnic. Folks called them inseparable. I used to joke that I had to schedule an appointment to see my own son. Her career started to take off after she landed a job with a big financial consulting firm downtown. I'd watch her leave the house each morning in a pressed blazer and heels, her hair pulled back tight, her stride purposeful. She carried confidence the way other women carried handbags, like it was part of her outfit, and people noticed. They always noticed Brianna. I was proud of her, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a shadow forming between us. She talked less about community dinners and more about client meetings, less about faith, more about numbers. I'd try to remind her where she came from, how much good she'd already done. She'd smile and say, "James, I can do more if I make more." Maybe she was right. Maybe that's what ambition sounds like when you've never had enough. One night she came home late, the city lights still in her eyes. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her face tired but glowing. "I think I'm ready to start my own firm," she said. "Carter Consulting. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" I looked at her and saw the same fire I'd seen in front of Jenkins' grocery years ago. The fire that drew me in. I nodded and said, "Then let's build it." She reached across the table, took my hand and said, "You've always believed in me, James. Don't stop now." I never did, even when I probably should have. The first few years were hard. Long nights, missed dinners, arguments about bills. I took side jobs fixing roofs and painting houses to keep us afloat while she chased her dream. There were times I thought we'd lose everything. But then the tide turned. Clients started calling from out of state. Money began to flow. She bought new office furniture, hired staff, upgraded her wardrobe, and started driving a car that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I remember watching her step out of that car in front of church one Sunday, sunglasses on, head high. The congregation whispered, half in awe, half in envy. My wife had become someone people wanted to be. But success can be a loud kind of loneliness. The more she climbed, the less she came home. Our dinners turned into phone calls. Our conversations turned into schedules. And Marcus, he noticed. He loved her fiercely but learned early that her attention had to be earned. When she missed his school play, I saw the disappointment in his face. He didn't say anything, but I knew. That night I told her, "You can't buy back moments like that." She sighed, brushed me off, said she'd make it up to him. But time doesn't do refunds. Still, I couldn't stop admiring her, the way she commanded a room, the way she could read people like scripture. There was always something magnetic about her strength, even when it burned me. Once at a charity banquet, I overheard two businessmen say, "That woman's going places, shame her husband stuck behind a pulpit." I smiled, pretending I hadn't heard, but the words stuck like thorns. Brianna noticed. Later that night she whispered, "Don't let small minds shame big dreams." I wanted to believe she meant both of us, but I knew she was already walking a path where I couldn't follow. Years later, when she moved into that glass-walled office downtown and started signing contracts worth more than my entire congregation's yearly donations, I visited her. She looked powerful behind that desk, almost untouchable. When I told her I missed the woman who used to fight grocery store managers, she smiled sadly and said, "She's still here, James. She just learned how to win." Looking back now, I realized she wasn't chasing money. She was chasing control. The kind she never had growing up. The kind poverty steals from you and never gives back. And I loved her too much to stop her from chasing it. I thought the fire in her eyes would always burn for us both. But I was wrong. Still, when I close my eyes, I can see her standing in the summer sun, that same yellow dress fluttering in the heat, arguing for what's right, like it was personal. Maybe it always was. Maybe that's why, even after everything, I still can't bring myself to hate her. Because deep down, I know that woman. The one who fought for fairness on a dusty sidewalk never really disappeared. She just learned to hide behind boardroom glass. And if the letter she left behind says what I think it does, I might finally understand why she did it. The first time I realized our home had changed, it wasn't because of an argument, it was because of the silence. There used to be music in that house. Gospel humming from the kitchen radio, Brianna singing while she stirred collard greens, Marcus laughing as I lifted him onto my shoulders. Now there was only the faint ticking of the wall clock, the hum of her laptop, and the sound of her heels clicking across the hardwood floor at midnight. Success has a sound, and it isn't laughter. It's isolation disguised as progress. I used to wait up for her. I'd sit at the kitchen table, sermon notes spread out, pretending to read while I watched the headlights crawl up the driveway. She'd come in smelling of perfume and exhaustion, her eyes red from the glow of spreadsheets. "Don't wait up, James," she'd say, kissing the air somewhere near my cheek. "You've got early service tomorrow." The first few times I tried to tell her about the day, about Mrs. Green's son finally getting clean, about the new roof we built for the church, but she'd just nod, distracted already halfway up the stairs. After a while I stopped talking. Sunday dinners were the last to go. It started small, a client meeting, a late flight, a missed call. But before long it was just Marcus and me sitting at the table staring at two empty chairs. I'd carve the roast and tell him, "Your mama's working hard for us." He'd just shrug and poke at his plate. I could see the disappointment settling into him like a bad habit. The boy who used to pray over every meal stopped bowing his head altogether. He'd ask questions I didn't know how to answer. Why does Mom always miss church? Why does she smile more on her phone than at home? I'd tell him what any father would. She's doing it for us. But even then, I could hear the lie in my own voice. Brianna's world started to shift upward. New clothes, new car, new friends. Our old neighbors who used to come by for coffee and cornbread were replaced by business partners who drank imported wine and talked about brand positioning. I tried to fit in once. She invited me to a dinner at one of her clients' homes, a mansion with marble floors that smelled like money and emptiness. The men there spoke in numbers, the women in compliments. When I mentioned I was a pastor, the room went quiet for a heartbeat. Then someone smiled politely and changed the subject. On the ride home, I told her, "I don't think I belong in that world." She said, "Then maybe you should try harder." That was the first time her words stung more than they should have. Marcus noticed the distance growing too. He started spending more time at his mother's office, fascinated by her power, her presence. I'd watch him mimic her mannerisms, the way she crossed her arms, the way she said people's names like she owned them. At 12 years old, he was already learning that money could move mountains faster than faith ever could. One night I caught him counting bills from the church donation box, curiosity on his face like it was harmless. "You don't touch what people give to God," I said firmly. He looked at me unbothered and said, "Maybe God doesn't need it as much as we do." That was when I realized pride had snuck into our house, and it was wearing a familiar face. Brianna wasn't cruel, just consumed. Her ambition was like gravity. It pulled everything toward it. I tried to be patient to understand. She'd come home after midnight, collapse into bed without undressing, and whisper apologies that sounded more like excuses. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, remembering the woman who once argued about fairness at a grocery store. Somewhere between the first contract and the third office expansion, that woman disappeared. I told myself she'd come back once things settled down. They never did. The church began to feel the strain too. Folks whispered that I'd lost my touch, that a man who couldn't save his marriage had no business preaching about salvation. Attendance dropped. Donations slowed. One morning I found a note slipped under the church door. It said, "Maybe the Lord's testing your pride, Pastor." No signature, just truth written in cruel handwriting. Brianna and I fought about money next. It was never about the bills. It was about control. She said I needed to modernize the church, start streaming services online, build a digital presence. I said faith didn't need a marketing plan. She called me stubborn. I called her lost. We slept back to back that night, the air between us cold and heavy. Then came the fundraiser. She'd promised to attend, said she'd even bring some of her wealthy clients to help support the church roof project. I remember standing at the podium that night, scanning the crowd, waiting for her. Every time the door opened, my heart leaped and fell. She never came. Instead, a courier delivered a check in her name, no note, no message, just money. People clapped when I announced the donation. I smiled, but inside I felt something break. Love without presence is just charity. Marcus stopped coming to church soon after. "It's boring," he said. "Nobody important goes there." I didn't argue. I just watched him walk away, taller now, dressed sharp like his mother, already half a man and twice as cold. Brianna told me not to worry, that he was finding his own path. But I could see where that path was leading, straight toward the same hollow success that had taken her from me. One evening I drove by her office after service. The lights were still on, though it was close to midnight. Through the glass I saw her standing alone, phone to her ear, laughter echoing in the empty space. For a moment I almost walked in. But I stopped. The woman in that office wasn't my wife anymore. She was someone else. Someone who'd traded church choirs for boardrooms, Sunday prayers for stock reports. I turned the car around and drove home in silence. I tried to hold on a little longer. I told myself every marriage had seasons, that winter would eventually pass. But the truth is, ours wasn't frozen, it was burned out. She'd built a life that didn't need me in it, and Marcus was learning to do the same. There's a kind of pain that doesn't announce itself with shouting or tears. It just sits quietly in the corner, watching everything you love drift further away. Still, part of me couldn't stop hoping. Hope is a stubborn thing. It survives even after love forgets how. I'd see Brianna's face on magazine covers, her name mentioned on the radio, and I'd feel both pride and grief twisted together like barbed wire. She'd made it. She'd become everything she said she would. But the higher she climbed, the smaller our family became. Sometimes when the house gets too quiet, I walk past the room that used to be Marcus's and pause at the door. His trophies still shine on the shelf untouched, collecting dust and memories. I tell myself there's still time to fix things, to remind him where he came from. But deep down, I know that once ambition takes root, it grows faster than faith can follow. And yet, I can't shake the feeling that Brianna's success wasn't the whole story. Something else was moving behind the scenes, something I couldn't see then, but would soon change everything. By the time Marcus reached high school, the boy who used to run to the door yelling "Daddy" had turned into a stranger with my last name. He'd walk past me in the mornings without so much as a nod, eyes glued to his phone, dressed in sneakers that cost more than my month's tithe. He didn't just change, he evolved into someone I didn't recognize, molded by a world I didn't belong to anymore. I'd hear him on the phone with his friends, talking about vacations in Miami, the new Benz his mother let him drive, the private tutor she hired to help him stay ahead. When I asked how his classes were going, he said, "Good. You wouldn't get it." I'd smile, pretending I didn't feel the sting, but I got it. He wasn't talking about school. He was talking about life, His life, the one that no longer had room for me. Our home had become two houses under one roof. Brianna and Marcus shared a language I didn't speak anymore, the language of deals, power, and status. They'd sit at the dining table talking about new contracts and investors while I cleared the dishes. If I mentioned something from the church, Marcus would smirk, shake his head, and say, "That's cute, Dad." He meant it like a joke, but it cut deeper than he knew. Once when I tried to teach him how to fix a broken cabinet, he laughed and said, "Why do things by hand when you can just buy new ones?" I told him money doesn't teach a man pride in his work. He rolled his eyes and walked away muttering, "You wouldn't understand. There's a moment in every parent's life when you realize you've lost your child not to death, but to distance. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, like erosion. You notice it in the way they stop asking for advice, then in how they stop calling you altogether." By senior year, Marcus had perfected the art of pretending I didn't exist. I'd show up at his basketball games sitting alone on the bleachers, cheering quietly while Brianna waved from the VIP section with her business partners. After the games, she'd wrap an arm around him and they'd pose for photos while I stood at the edge of the crowd invisible. Graduation day was the breaking point. The auditorium buzzed with the kind of excitement that makes you forget the years of struggle leading to that moment. Parents clutched bouquets, grandparents wiped tears, and teachers smiled proudly. I sat alone in the middle rows clutching a program printed with Marcus's name in bold letters. When they called him up, I stood clapping until my palms burned. He crossed the stage, shaking hands, flashing that confident grin that had once belonged to his mother. My chest swelled with pride and ache all at once. Then I saw Brianna in the front row, surrounded by her wealthy friends, her laughter echoing louder than the applause. She looked radiant, untouchable. After the ceremony, I found them outside near the fountain. Marcus was surrounded by people in tailored suits and gold watches. He spotted me, and for a moment our eyes met. I smiled, ready to tell him how proud I was. But he turned back to his crowd like he hadn't seen me at all. Brianna noticed and came over, perfume strong and smile polite. "James," she said, "I didn't know you'd be here." I looked at her, the woman I once prayed with, and said softly, "You knew." She didn't respond. Instead, she handed me a framed photo of Marcus in his cap and gown. "For the church bulletin," she said. That's when I realized I'd become a symbol in their story, a box to check a background character in a life I helped build. Later that night, I drove home in silence. The streetlights stretched long across the windshield, slicing the darkness like broken promises. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and sat on the porch listening to the cicadas sing in the humid Atlanta air. My hands still trembled from clapping earlier, from holding on to pride when I should have let grief take over. The stars looked like distant lanterns, beautiful, unreachable, and fading. I thought about calling Marcus, telling him I loved him no matter what. But I didn't. I knew he wouldn't pick up. Weeks passed. He got a scholarship to an out-of-state college, some fancy program his mother arranged through her connections. I helped pack his boxes anyway. When I handed him the Bible my father had given me, he hesitated before taking it. "Thanks," he said, his voice flat, eyes darting toward the door. I wanted to tell him that inside those worn pages were lessons stronger than any business degree, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I nodded, helped him load the car, and watched him drive away. The taillights disappeared down the street like the closing of a chapter I hadn't finished writing. The first Sunday after he left, I looked out at the congregation and saw empty space where he used to sit. I preached about prodigal sons, about patience and love that endures even when it's not returned. The congregation thought I was delivering a sermon. I was just trying to convince myself. Brianna called every now and then, not to talk, but to update me. "Marcus is thriving," she'd say. "He's networking with the right people." I'd nod, listening to her voice fade in and out like a radio losing signal. I never asked if he asked about me. I already knew the answer. One evening I got a letter from the university addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Carter. Inside was a photo of Marcus shaking hands with a state senator at an event. He looked older, confident, untouchable. On the back, he'd written 2 words in small, neat handwriting: "Thank you." I stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was gratitude or a farewell. I started keeping a box for him, photos, sermon notes, newspaper clippings, small things I thought he'd want one day when he remembered where he came from. Every time I added something new, I prayed it wouldn't be the last. Then one night, months later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was deep tired. "Pastor Carter," it said. "You might want to come to the station. It's about your son." My grip tightened around the phone. The air went still heavy like the pause before a storm. I grabbed my keys, heart-pounding mind racing through every possible sin a young man could commit. As I stepped outside, the night was thick with humidity, the kind that makes you feel like the whole world is holding its breath. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew whatever waited for me next would change everything. The church was packed that morning, but the air felt hollow. Every pew was lined with people in black suits and designer sunglasses, the kind who never knew Brianna beyond her business card. They whispered about her brilliance, her legacy, her empire, as if success was the measure of a soul. I sat near the aisle, hands folded, eyes fixed on the casket draped in white lilies. Her favorite, though I doubted anyone else there knew that. The choir sang softly, their voices blending with the low hum of the organ. Outside, Atlanta's sky hung gray and still, as if even God had paused to watch how this story would end. Marcus stood at the podium, looking every bit the man his mother had raised him to be. Sharp suit, confident stance, a presence that demanded attention. The congregation leaned forward when he spoke, expecting something profound. What they got was a reckoning. My mother built everything from the ground up, he began. She rose above small minds and small men who told her she couldn't. The crowd murmured approval. His eyes found me in the third row. She carried dead weight for years, he said, his tones slicing through the sanctuary, even when that weight wore a collar and called itself righteous. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the organist froze mid-note. The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. I could feel every eye turning toward me, waiting to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. I just looked at him, my son, my blood, and saw in him every wound I'd left unhealed. He went on, voice trembling slightly now, though he masked it with arrogance. She deserved better. She deserved a man who believed in her dreams instead of preaching about humility while living off her ambition. The congregation shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded, some frowned. I heard a faint amen from somewhere in the back, and that hurt worse than the insult itself. When he finished, the applause was hesitant but real. He stepped down from the podium and sat beside the casket, refusing to meet my gaze. I rose slowly, not because I wanted to speak, but because I couldn't let her story end like that. The usher tried to stop me, whispering, "Pastor, maybe not now." I brushed his hand away and walked to the front. Every step echoed through the church like a drumbeat, steady and calm. When I reached the podium, I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at her. Even in death, Brianna looked formidable, the faint trace of lipstick still perfect, her hands folded like she was resting between victories. I took a breath, the kind that feels like swallowing fire, and said, "My son's not wrong." A ripple moved through the room. Brianna did build something extraordinary. She was fire and thunder. She made rooms brighter and men smaller. But greatness, I said, turning toward Marcus now, isn't just about rising. It's about remembering who helped you stand. He shifted in his seat, jaw tight. I continued. I didn't marry perfection. I married a woman who fought for everything she ever had, even when the fight turned inward. I loved her through the storms, through the silence, through the parts she didn't want anyone to see, even when she stopped loving herself. The silence that followed was absolute. I saw a few heads bow, not in pity but in understanding. I turned to Marcus again. "Son, you can rewrite history all you want, but truth doesn't die with the people who tell it." His face hardened, but I caught the flicker, the smallest tremor in his eyes. He looked away first. I stepped down and returned to my seat. The service continued, but I barely heard it. My hands trembled slightly on my knees, the adrenaline wearing off, the weight of grief settling in. When the choir began their final hymn, I stood again quietly and walked out. I couldn't watch them lower her into the ground while strangers clapped for her success. Outside, the air was thick with humidity and perfume. A line of luxury cars waited by the curb engines, idling chauffeurs checking their watches. I found a quiet spot near the old oak tree by the cemetery fence, the same kind of tree we used to sit under after Sunday service back when the world was simpler. I could still hear Marcus's voice in my head, sharp and unforgiving. Failure. The word echoed like thunder. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had failed not as a husband or a pastor, but as a father who couldn't protect his son from his mother's shadow. As I stood there, one of Brianna's former associates approached me. A woman in her 40s, immaculately dressed, holding an envelope. "She asked me to give you this," she said softly. I took it, fingers trembling slightly. The envelope was sealed with Brianna's initials pressed in gold, my name written in her flawless handwriting. I didn't open it, not yet. I just slid it into my jacket pocket and thanked the woman. Marcus passed me a few minutes later, walking fast, avoiding eye contact. I wanted to call out to tell him that one day he'd understand the cost of worshiping success, that the higher you climb, the lonelier it gets. But I didn't. Some lessons can't be taught from a pulpit. They have to break you first. The crowd began to thin. The sky darkened, thunder rumbling in the distance. I stayed until the last car left, until the cemetery fell silent again. The lilies on her casket trembled in the wind, petals scattering like white ash. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the envelope, and stared at it under the dimming light. Part of me was afraid to open it, afraid that her last words would wound deeper than anything Marcus had said. But another part of me, stubborn, hopeful, needed to know, needed to hear her voice one last time, even if it came from paper and ink. I turned the envelope over in my hands, tracing the seal with my thumb. The rain started to fall, slow, deliberate drops that tapped against my coat like a warning. I slipped the letter back into my pocket and whispered, "Not yet, Brianna." Because deep down I knew what that letter held wasn't just goodbye. It was something else. Something she'd been waiting years to say. And whatever it wasn't meant for the man she left behind. It was meant for the one her son had become. The law office smelled of cedar and money. The kind of place where people talk softly but make decisions that change lives. I sat in the corner chair, the one slightly out of the circle, watching sunlight bleed through the blinds and stripe across the polished mahogany table. Marcus sat at the head, his suit perfect, his cufflinks catching the light every time he moved his wrist. The lawyer, a gray-haired man named Caldwell, shuffled papers in front of him with the care of someone handling a loaded weapon. There were others in the room, too. Brianna's business partners, her accountant, and two women from the firm who whispered like the world owed them secrets. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I already knew how this would go. Everyone did. Brianna had built her empire with Marcus at her side. The world expected him to inherit it all, and I was just there to make the picture look complete. Caldwell cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. "I, Brianna Carter, being of sound mind and body." The words rolled over me like church bells, solemn, distant, final. I didn't move. I just watched Marcus. He sat back relaxed, one leg crossed over the other, a smile tugging at his lips. He didn't hear the will. He heard confirmation of what he already believed, that his mother's world now belonged to him. The first few pages were predictable debts, settled donations made to charities, endowments for scholarships. Then Caldwell's voice changed just slightly. "To my son Marcus Carter, I leave our family home in Brookhaven and the sum of $500,000. The room shifted. The air thickened. I heard the whisper before I saw Marcus's face change. He blinked once, twice, like the words hadn't landed properly. What he said, a sharp laugh breaking through his shock. Caldwell looked up but kept reading. "And to my former husband, Pastor James Carter, I leave the remaining assets, including controlling interest in Carter Consulting and the balance of $33.5 million. Silence. A silence so deep it rang in my ears. Marcus's smile vanished. His chair scraped violently against the floor as he stood, his voice cutting through the still air like a blade. That's a mistake. That has to be a mistake. Caldwell didn't flinch. I assure you, Mr. Carter, these are your mother's wishes, signed and notarized. Marcus's eyes darted to me full of fury. You did this. You manipulated her. She wasn't in her right mind. You. I raised a hand slowly. Marcus. My voice was calm, quiet. Sit down. He slammed his fist on the table. Don't tell me what to do. You don't get to take what's mine. I leaned forward. It was never yours. His breathing quickened. The people around us looked away, pretending not to witness the implosion of a family. Caldwell cleared his throat again, trying to regain order, but Marcus wasn't done. You didn't love her, he spat. You let her drown in her own success while you hid behind that damn pulpit. I stood. The chair groaned beneath me. You're right, I said softly. I couldn't save her from herself. But I never stopped loving her, Marcus, even when she forgot what love was. He stared at me, jaw tight, eyes red, the same eyes that used to look up at me with pride when he was a boy. Now they burned with something colder, betrayal, fear. Caldwell waited, then pushed a sealed envelope toward me. She asked me to deliver this personally. I took it, feeling the weight of it, the smoothness of the paper against my calloused hands. Marcus lunged for it, but I stepped back. No, I said quietly. Not this time. He froze, chest heaving. The room was holding its breath again. For a long second I thought he might hit me. The room went still after the lawyer's last words, like the air itself was waiting for someone to breathe first. Marcus's head snapped toward me so fast I thought he'd break his neck. His jaw clenched, his eyes burned hot with disbelief, and for a moment I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who looked at me for answers. But that boy was gone. What sat across from me now was a man shaped by resentment, pride, and a kind of grief that didn't know where to go. He laughed once, sharp and humorless, like the sound of glass cracking. "This is a joke, right?" he said, voice rising. "Tell me you paid him off, Martin. Tell me this isn't real." The lawyer didn't flinch. "It's very real, Mr. Carter. Your mother was of sound mind when she signed the documents. Everything was verified twice over." Marcus slammed his hands on the polished table, the sound echoing through the sterile office like a gunshot. Sound mind. She was on medication. She wasn't herself. You let her do this. He turned on me. His face flushed. You manipulated her. You preyed on her guilt. You couldn't stand that she finally made something of herself without you, so you twisted her right before she died. I didn't speak. I just looked at him, watching the storm build behind his eyes. The lawyer tried to interject, but Marcus cut him off. "No, don't you dare talk to me about legality. This isn't law, this is theft." He shoved the papers off the table, scattering them like confetti across the floor. The lawyer sighed, kneeling to pick them up while Marcus paced the room like a caged animal. "You think I don't see what this is?" he spat. "You've been jealous of her for years. You resented her success, her independence. And now you're standing here acting like you earned this." My hands rested calmly on the table, but my pulse thundered in my ears. "I didn't ask for any of this," I said quietly. "Your mother made her choice." Marcus spun toward me, pointing a finger inches from my face. "You're lying. She told me everything was for me. She said I'd take over the company. She promised me." The lawyer cleared his throat, unfolding a single sheet from the pile. "Your mother anticipated this reaction, Mr. Carter. She wrote a letter to both of you. It's in her handwriting, notarized and time-stamped." Marcus froze. His fury faltered, replaced by something colder, fear. "What letter?" The lawyer handed me a sealed envelope with Brianna's initials pressed in gold, identical to the one I'd received after the funeral. He handed Marcus his own. "She wanted you both to read them separately before speaking again," he said, his tone professional, but waited. Marcus snatched his envelope, staring at it like it might bite him. "This doesn't mean anything," he muttered. She was confused. She didn't know what she was doing. The lawyer's voice was steady. "Your mother was as sharp as ever when she signed that will. She was calm, deliberate, and very clear about her intentions. She knew exactly who she trusted and why." Marcus's head jerked up. His expression flickered between rage and disbelief. "You mean she trusted him?" "Him?" He gestured toward me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong life. "The man she divorced. The man she said was holding her back." I finally spoke, my voice low but cutting through the tension. Maybe she realized the only thing holding her back was forgetting where she came from. His face twisted. "Don't you dare preach to me." I stood then, meeting him eye to eye. "I'm not preaching. I'm telling you what your mother already knew, that power without compassion is just corruption in a suit." He lunged toward me, but the lawyer stepped between us. "Enough!" The word cracked like a whip. "This is not the place." Marcus stepped back, chest heaving, his hands trembling. His eyes darted to the papers on the desk, to the signatures, to the embossed seals that made the whole thing undeniable. He looked trapped, like he'd been cornered by his own reflection. "Why would she do this?" he whispered, the anger slipping into disbelief. "Why would she give it all to you?" "Because she trusted me," I said quietly. "Because she knew I'd protect what she built, not worship it." He shook his head, pacing again, muttering under his breath. "No. No, she couldn't. She wouldn't." His voice broke. "She told me I was her legacy." The lawyer folded his hands. "You are her legacy, Mr. Carter, but not in the way you think." Marcus turned on him. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means your mother believed her greatest mistake was teaching you how to win without teaching you how to care." Marcus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The room went quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels alive, like it's waiting for someone to confess. He stood there, breathing hard, his eyes darting between me, the lawyer, and the letter in his hand. For the first time, I saw something raw beneath the rage hurt. He sank into the chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "She's punishing me," he said softly. "That's what this is." "No," I said, my voice steady. "She's saving you. You just don't see it yet." He looked up, eyes wet but furious. "You think you're the hero here, don't you?" I didn't answer. Heroes don't stand in rooms like that. They survive them. He stood abruptly, snatched his keys off the table, and pointed at me again. "You won't get away with this," he hissed. "I'll fight you. I'll take you to court. I'll drag your name through every headline in Atlanta if I have to." "Do what you have to," I said. "But before you do read her letter, really read it." He didn't respond. He stormed out the door, slamming so hard the windows rattled. I stayed there for a long time after he left, the lawyer quietly gathering the scattered papers, the scent of Brianna's perfume lingering faintly on the envelopes. When I finally stepped outside, the air hit me like cold water. The city buzzed around me, indifferent and alive. I slipped my hand into my pocket, feeling the edge of the unopened letter against my fingertips. I could almost hear her voice, calm and measured, saying my name like she used to. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was curious, because if there was one thing Brianna Carter never did, it was leave words without purpose. And whatever she wrote in that letter, I knew it wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a reckoning. I waited until nightfall to open the letter. The house was silent except for the faint buzz of the street light outside and the soft ticking of the wall clock, a sound that had marked every hour of my life since she left. I sat at the same kitchen table where Brianna and I had once planned our future, the wood still scarred from years of dinners, arguments, and forgotten prayers. The envelope lay in front of me, gold seal, catching the dim light. My hands trembled as I broke it open. Her handwriting was still neat, precise, the kind that made every word feel intentional. The scent of her perfume lingered on the paper, faint but unmistakable. For a moment it was like she was right there again, sitting across from me, daring me to speak first. James, it began. If you're reading this, then the noise has quieted and maybe for the first time you can hear me. I stopped reading and stared at that first line. Even in death she knew how to command a room. I took a deep breath and continued. You were right about me. I chased something that didn't love me back. Power. Recognition. The applause of strangers. I told myself I was building a future for our family, but I was really building a fortress to hide from the truth that I was afraid of becoming ordinary. The words hit like confession. I could almost hear her voice, low and deliberate, the same tone she used when she was cornered but too proud to show it. I spent years resenting you for being content with less. I thought your faith was weakness. I thought your patience was cowardice. But when everything started to fall apart, when the world I built began to crumble beneath the weight of its own pride, it was your voice that stayed in my head. The same voice that told me grace doesn't shout, it endures. I set the letter down and closed my eyes. I remembered the first time I said those words back when we were young and broke sitting in the back pew after a sermon that went on too long. She'd laughed, teasing me for being too serious. Now she was quoting me like scripture. The irony wasn't lost on me. She continued, I didn't write this to apologize for leaving you because we both know I wouldn't have listened if you'd tried to stop me. I wrote this because I want you to understand why I did what I did in the end. I gave you everything because I finally saw the difference between owning something and protecting it. You always protected what mattered, our son, our community, even me, long after I stopped deserving it. My throat tightened. There were tear stains on the paper, faint but visible little marks of humanity from a woman who'd spent her life trying to appear untouchable. Marcus will be angry. He'll say I betrayed him. Maybe he's right, but I can't give him what he wants until he understands what it costs. I raised him to be strong, but I forgot to teach him to be kind. You never made that mistake. You showed love even when it wasn't returned. That's the kind of legacy worth leaving. I looked up at the window. Rain had started to fall, tapping against the glass like the echo of her words. Each drop sounded like a memory, like a warning. To my son I leave the house, and a fraction of the wealth, not to punish him, but to teach him. He believes he's building an empire, but I pray he learns that an empire without heart is just a monument to loneliness. Tell him this if he'll listen. Son, learn to build something with your heart before you build it with your hands. I sat there for a long time after that, reading those lines over and over until they blurred into each other. For years I'd blamed Brianna for everything, for the distance, for the ambition that split our family apart, for turning our son against me. But as I read her words, the edges of that anger softened. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, she was giving it. She'd written one last paragraph, short and final. I know you'll hate the spotlight this will bring, but the company needs a leader who remembers people, not profits. You taught me that the value of something isn't what it costs, but who it serves. Make sure Marcus learns that too. And when you stand at the pulpit again, don't preach about me. Preach about grace, because I finally found mine. Your stubborn wife, Brianna. When I finished reading, I didn't cry. I just sat there letting the weight of her words settle like dust. Outside, the rain fell harder and thunder rolled in the distance. It sounded like the world exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it beside the candle I'd lit earlier. The flame flickered, catching the edge of the paper, turning it gold for just a moment before it steadied again. I thought about Marcus, about his face when he stormed out of the lawyer's office, about the fury in his voice when he called me a thief. I thought about how much of his mother I saw in him, the same fire, the same pride, the same fear of being small. Somewhere inside that anger was a boy still searching for approval from ghosts. The next morning I drove to his apartment. His car was parked outside, engine still warm. I knocked on the door and waited. He opened it after a long pause, eyes bloodshot, jaw set. "What do you want?" he asked. I held out the letter. "She wanted you to have this." He hesitated before taking it, his fingers brushing mine for the briefest second. He didn't invite me in. I didn't ask to be. As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Did you read yours?" I nodded. "Yeah," I said. And for the first time in a long while, I think I understood her. He didn't reply. I saw him standing there holding the letter like it might burn him, and I knew it would take time, years maybe, for him to face what was inside. When I got back to my car, I looked up at the sky. The storm had cleared and sunlight was breaking through the clouds, soft and golden, just the way Brianna used to like it. I started the engine and whispered a quiet prayer, not for her, not even for me, but for Marcus. That he'd read those words and finally see that the inheritance she left wasn't money. It was mercy. And deep down I knew the story wasn't over. Because sometimes the dead don't haunt us out of anger, they linger to finish what love couldn't. When I walked out of that lawyer's office, the city felt different. The air had a pulse again, warm and heavy, carrying the faint smell of rain and exhaust. Atlanta shimmered under the dying light, the skyline stretched like a promise I hadn't earned. I should have felt victorious. $33 million and a company with my name now etched into its future. Most men would have floated out of that building. But I didn't feel rich. I felt hollow, quiet, undone in a way that wasn't pain anymore. It was something deeper, something close to peace. I walked past the marble steps, past the men in suits who nodded with the polite emptiness of people who measure worth by fabric and title. Their gazes lingered on me longer than usual, curiosity mixing with envy. They thought they were seeing a man who'd won. They couldn't have been more wrong. I wasn't walking out with wealth. I was walking out with a reckoning. The evening air brushed my skin cool against the heat of my thoughts. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small in this city. I didn't feel like a man who'd been left behind. I felt grounded, steady, like I'd been handed something far greater than money, clarity. I drove home through the city streets I'd known my whole life. The same cracked sidewalks, the same old diner on the corner where Brianna and I used to split a slice of peach pie when we couldn't afford two. The same church bell ringing in the distance, slow and steady, calling no one and everyone at once. At a red light, I looked up at the glass towers that reached into the clouds, the ones she used to dream of conquering. I wondered if she could see me now, standing in the middle of everything she'd built, not as her rival, not as her mistake, but as the man who finally understood her. For years I'd blamed her ambition for tearing us apart, but now I saw it wasn't ambition that did it. It was fear. She'd spent her life running from the smallness of where we came from, and I'd spent mine resenting her for it. Neither of us realized we were chasing the same thing in different ways, peace. When I reached home, the porch light flickered like it always did. I'd never replaced it. Maybe I liked the imperfection. I stepped inside, setting the envelope with her letter back on the table. It looked smaller now, less like a burden and more like a relic. The house was quiet again, but not empty. There was something living in the silence now, a kind of grace I hadn't felt in years. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the streetlights come on one by one. The sound of distant traffic hummed like a lullaby. For the first time, I didn't reach for the past. I didn't replay the arguments, the moments when pride drowned love. I just sat there and breathed. I thought about Marcus, about how lost he looked when I handed him that letter. There was anger in his eyes, yes, but there was also confusion, an ache he couldn't name yet. He'd spent his whole life believing love was proven through achievement. He didn't know yet that love, real love, was built in the quiet, the late nights when you stay even when there's nothing left to say. I prayed for him that night, not for forgiveness or understanding, but for time. Time for the truth to reach him the way it had finally reached me. I took a walk before bed down the street where the pavement cracked beneath the roots of old oaks. The air smelled like wet earth and summer grass. I passed by the church, its doors locked, lights dimmed. The stained glass caught the moonlight just enough to cast colors on the sidewalk, blue, red, gold, the colors of redemption. I stood there for a while, hand resting on the cool iron gate. Inside, I could almost hear the echoes of old hymns, the voices of people long gone rising and falling like a tide. That church had seen every version of me, the young preacher full of fire, the husband losing faith, the father watching his world fall apart. And now maybe it was seeing me again, as I truly was, not broken, not defeated, just awake. I whispered a prayer, not the rehearsed kind, but one that came straight from the bone. "Thank you, Lord," I said softly, for giving her peace and for giving me purpose. My voice cracked at the end, but I didn't care. I wasn't asking for anything this time. I was just saying thank you. When I looked up, the clouds had parted. The moon hung low and bright over the city, bathing everything in a soft silver light. It felt like a benediction, like the whole world had exhaled. I thought of Brianna not as the woman who left me or the woman who built an empire, but as the girl who once danced barefoot in the rain after a revival service, laughing so loud the whole neighborhood came to their windows. That's the version of her I chose to keep. The one before ambition hardened her, the one who believed in grace. The next morning I drove to the edge of town, to a field just beyond the highway where the grass still grew wild. I took off my shoes, stepped onto the cool earth, and let the wind hit my face. It carried the smell of honeysuckle and distant rain. I closed my eyes and felt something I hadn't in a long time: freedom. I wasn't Pastor Carter, the widower, the forgotten preacher, or the accidental millionaire. I was just James, a man who'd spent half his life running from pain and the other half trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. But standing there, I realized I didn't need to fix anything. Some stories aren't about repair. They're about revelation. The money, the company, the inheritance, it didn't mean salvation. It meant responsibility. A second chance to lead, not from a pulpit, but from example. To show Marcus, and maybe even the world, that redemption isn't about how much you earn, but how much you learn. As the sun began to rise behind the Atlanta skyline, the city glowing in shades of gold and rose, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The light hit my face warm and forgiving, and for the first time in years, I smiled without forcing it. I turned toward the road, ready to go back, ready to start again. Life wasn't over. It had just begun again, stripped of pride, filled with grace. I took one last look at the horizon and whispered, "You did good, Brianna. You finally came home." Then I walked away from the past and into the morning, not as a man who'd inherited a fortune, but as one who'd finally found his way back to the truth. Life doesn't always hand out justice the way we expect. It offers lessons instead. Pastor James's story reminds us that peace isn't found in wealth or recognition, but in forgiveness, humility, and grace. For years he carried the pain of betrayal, pride, and loss, only to learn that God's timing brings both healing and purpose. We spend so much of our lives trying to fix what's broken or prove our worth, when sometimes the true victory lies in letting go. His journey shows that redemption isn't about being right, it's about being ready to grow even when it hurts. For those of us who've lived long enough to see dreams rise and fall, it's comforting to know that every ending carries a seed of renewal. No matter how late it feels, it's never too late to forgive, to make peace with your story, and to start again with a heart that's lighter and wiser. If this story touched your soul, subscribe for more stories of faith, justice, and redemption, and share in the comments what forgiveness has taught you in your own life.